Let me set the scene. It's 1949, 4 years after World War II has ended, and 4 years after the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when George Orwell, a prominent British author, publishes his book, 1984. It's a depiction of an imaginary totalitarianism future, just feasible enough to send shockwaves through Britain and the US. Then, later that same year, on August 29th, the Soviet Union explodes its first atomic bomb, and the Cold War has begun. There's no better way to identify the fears of a society than by examining their popular culture. For our purpose here today, we will be looking at how George Orwell's novel presents American societal fears during the Cold War era. Though George Orwell was British born and raised, his novel resonates and reflects the fears of the American people and other non-communist countries during this period. The three main worries of Americans during this time was 1. The use of atomic weapons in a harmful way, 2. The spread of communism and what that would mean for the world, and 3. Traitors. People were suspicious and did not know who they could trust. Film, literature, and music rendered images of communist spies living among us. Of all the artists and authors of the time, no one quite hit so close to home as Orwell. In the totalitarian dystopia Orwell imagined, class divides were exacerbated and 3 separate categories established: the inner party, the outer party, and the proles as they were called. Oceania is a world of lies and espionage. The authorities are constantly spying on citizens, punishing them for crimes of thought and any disloyalty to the omnipotent leader, Big Brother. The condition is dire. There is never enough goods to service the entire population, and people disappear on a daily basis. Does any of this sound familiar? I would hope not, or at least not directly. What makes the book so frightening to the American mind is how the flaws, if you can even call torturing your citizens merely flaws, are so similar to scenarios in our society, both in 1949, when the book was published, as well as today. There are many similarities between the novel 1984, and the Cold War era. Though examples may be exaggerated, predictions of what truly happened, the ideas still resonate. The first successful Soviet nuclear attack came as a profound shock to the West. The US intelligence believed that the Soviet Union was at least several years away from any atomic capabilities. What progress had been accelerated, thanks in part to physicist Klaus Fuchs and other scientists who were members of an effective Soviet spy ring inside the US nuclear program. Fuchs, a German immigrant who became a British subject before joining the Manhattan Project in 1943, he had been passing British and US nuclear secrets to Moscow. The question on many Americans' mind during this time was, who can we trust? I'm not saying whether or not this was a reasonable response, but rather that this fear and paranoia was present. In the novel, O'Brien, one of the inner party leaders, says that the party is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that old reformers imagined, a world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled on. A world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. The old civilizations claimed they were founded on love and justice. We are founded upon hatred. We have cut the links between child and parent, between man and man and woman. The Cold War had cut ties not only between nations, but between neighbors, as the party had when they eliminated human relationships in the book. In 1984, children were trained to spy on their parents. You were continuously being watched, and people you considered your friends could easily be out to get you. What kind of society is that? I ask. I will tell you that it is one that reflects the American paranoia during the nuclear era. As I said earlier, 1984 is set in a totalitarian world. Totalitarianism It is a political system where the state holds total authority over the society and seeks to control all aspects of public and private life wherever necessary. This concept was first developed in the early 20s by the Italian fascists. The concept became prominent in Western anti-communist political discourse during the Cold War era in order to highlight the perceived similarities between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Totalitarianism is like taking communism to the next level. It's when communism goes bad. In 1984, they described what the party wants and tells everyone what Oceania is. The ideal set up by the party was something huge, terrible, and glittering. A world of steel and concrete, of monstrous machines and terrifying weapons. A nation of warriors and fanatics, marching forward in perfect unity. 300 million people, all with the same face. The reality was decaying, dingy cities with unfed people. The two aims of the party is to conquer the whole surface of the earth and to extinguish once and for all the possibility of independent thought. There are, therefore, two great problems which the party is concerned to solve. One is the discovery, against his will, what another human being is thinking, and the other is to kill several 100 million people in a few seconds without giving any warning. Sounds like an atomic bomb. Americans feared that if communism spread, the entire world would become like the Soviet Union. Life would be unbearably bleak for most of the population. But then, like all communist regimes of the past, there would be a few people living a life of luxury and power. The third fear that plagued the American mind was the fear of detonation of an atomic weapon would do to humanity. The capabilities of the Soviet Union was terrifying. The public did not have a full grasp on the science behind nuclear bombs, and most people believed whatever they were told. The fear of war is present in almost every generation. War is an innately human entity. We do not need it to survive, and often it takes more lives than we are able to protect, but still, for some reason, we keep fighting. Orwell makes it quite obvious how ridiculous, but also necessary for the camaraderie of a nation, war is. He says, in the early 20th century, the vision of a future society, unbelievably rich, leisured, orderly, and efficient, a glittering antiseptic world of glass. Science and technology were developing at prodigious speeds, and it seemed natural that they would keep on developing. This failed to happen, partly because of a long series of wars, partly because scientific and technological process depended on the empirical habit of thought, which cannot survive in a strictly regimented society. Certain backwards areas have advanced in various devices, in some way, always connected with warfare and police espionage, have continued to be developed. But experiment and innovation have largely stopped, and the ravages of the atomic war of the 1950s have never been fully repaired. End quote. First of all, I think it's interesting that even in 1949, it was so obvious to George Orwell and the American people that atomic war was going to happen. He wrote it into the prediction of our future, though obviously full atomic war never ended up actually happening. And second, it was that how, even though medicine and communication stopped developing, and there was very little technological advance in this world that Orwell has created, all technology related to war developed to continue. Orwell later goes on to say that if war did not exist, the structure of the world society and its processes by which it maintains itself would not be essentially different. Though again, this might be an oversimplification, we as a country and humans as a whole, the whole species, often resort to violence. We lose our moral compass when power is offered to us. One can almost boil the whole Cold War mess down to the ideas of good versus evil or right versus wrong. It is always interesting to look at a topic from the other side's point of view. Like we've been talking about in class, with terrorism, And the question, can one man's terrorist really be another man's freedom fighter? We find ourselves again in a period of violence, where violence is a constant threat to our nation. Though the paranoia may not be quite as obvious, and the enemy is not as pronounced, we still live in a world today where Americans are suspicious of one another and fear the unknown. After 9/11, racial profiling became a common practice in the U.S. A country suspicious of its own people. That sounds quite similar to what Orwell predicted for us, does it not? He says, people of 2 generations ago were governed by private loyalties, individual relationships, and a completely helpless gesture, a tear, an embrace. A word spoken to a dying man could have value in itself. They were not loyal to a party or a country. They were loyal to each other. Along those lines, a huge part of the novel were the horrific methods of torture that the party used to punish their criminals. I cringe at the thought of this kind of physical and psychological torture, and when I was reading it, I thanked God that I lived in a country where I'm safe from that. But then I caught myself, and I thought again, I may be safe, but what about all the suspected terrorists? I want to emphasize the word suspected. Are we really all that different from the ruthless inner party portrayed in the book 1984? Was Orwell's prediction of his future, our present, really that wrong? The fears of the Cold War era are still relevant in the 21st century. All that has changed is the enemy. Thank you.